get underway. So Bradley Thomas, President of FInPro and Director of Community and Corporate Services at Hepburn Shire. So welcome to our mini conference. We might not be travelling down the road to beautiful Cape Shank, which is really disappointing because that's obviously the social but professional development highlight of your year, coming to the FInPro conference. And they're really disappointed that we couldn't hold it, but obviously given the situation of where we're in, we are doing things virtually, and it's fantastic because I said there's over 200 people registered to attend today, so thank you. Firstly, can I pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land, and of course today we'll be meeting on many lands across Victoria and possibly interstate for people working away, so pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. As I said, welcome to our mini conference. It's been an absolutely challenging year, both professionally and personally, I'm sure, for all of you. As I said, hopefully there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, but we're using this afternoon to take a bit of a reflection of the 8 to 10 months of the year so far, and a little bit of a look back, but a way forward too. So a range of speakers from technical, a couple of speakers that will probably challenge our thinking, and some real insights from a number of CEOs in the sector around how different 2020's been and what they're really looking forward to in 2021. And obviously we'll finish off tonight with our virtual drinks, which, as I said, won't be quite the same as the dance floor, but we'll have to make it work. So I appreciate everyone coming along. Today's first session, it's fantastic to hear from two of our really senior members of VAGO, and we've gone straight to the top with Andrew Greaves, as the Victorian Auditor General, to speak to us, and Sam Chu, the Acting Sector Director of Local Government, who I'm sure a lot of you have been touching base over the last couple of months as we've been through our first virtual audit year end. So I see most people, most organisations are nearly there, but hopefully these two can provide a bit of an insight. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andrew first. He'll go through a bit of a presentation, and we will have an opportunity for Q&A. So if you can just put your questions in the chat, I'll be able to pick them up and get them through to Andrew. So as I said, I don't think Andrew's any stranger to FInPro conferences, and I'll hand over to you, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Bradley. Thanks for the opportunity to present this year again. You're right, it's not Cape Shank, and I'm sitting here in the comfort of my lounge room, and I'm sure you're all sitting in, hopefully in comfortable spots. We've, as I said, I think in my annual report, we started the year like any other year, and we've ended in fairly extraordinary circumstances that none of us could have anticipated. I think that was a question in the email that came out to me. Should we have anticipated this? The answer clearly is no, we shouldn't. But we always, of course, should anticipate disruptions to our business. And I guess we're all learning lessons and taking lessons from that. Today, I thought what I'd do is just run you quickly through some of the risks and challenges that we see. It's kind of like the auditor's perspective of the world as we've moved into this set of extraordinary circumstances, and as we're slowly moving out. Of course, a lot of you are joining us from regional and rural Victoria, and good on you, breathing that free, fresh air out there, whereas locked down here in Melbourne. We're hoping that we'll soon be able to get out and about and come and visit you. Although, again, the whole idea of this being able to meet and work remotely is something I think that's going to be with us now for a long, long time. In fact, from my own organisation's perspective, we've already started talking about better normal after COVID normal. And what we mean by that is we really want to try and nail the good things that have come from this and make sure that we capture those and build on those. So the session outline, well, I've kind of already said, you know, the past is a foreign country now, very foreign to us. What was it then? We've kind of all experienced what's changed in a very short space of time and continues to change. And a shout out to you all, in fact, in context of doing the financial statements this year. Sounds like a magnificent effort on everyone's behalf to get the financial statements across the line so you can get your annual reports out. So I don't want to spend too much on what's changed, but I'll certainly just want to talk about some of these risks and risks that are attendant upon crisis situations in particular, go to issues of waste, mismanagement, but also to fraud and security. And in the middle of all that, and the things that we focus on as auditors, of course, are our controls, and your controls, I should say. So I'll just want to quickly work through and talk to you about some of the control issues that may have emerged or that may still emerge as you kind of continue into COVID normal. But I'll start with, there's nothing new under the sun. And I always look at times like this around the world and interstate and see what other auditors general are doing. And there was an Ebola outbreak in 2014-15 in Liberia and Sierra Leone and other parts of Africa. And the auditors over there thought they better have a look at what happened in the response to that epidemic. And they went and did a series of audits. That's just a bit of a background as to the types of things they looked at and who they looked at. And of course, it's mainly focused, as you'd imagine, on the state government response. And but I think when I looked at and read the report and I looked at their findings, I thought, well, these risks could be attendant really upon any organisation at state or local government level to a greater or lesser extent, depending on how much you've been impacted by the crisis. And on the right here is just a quick summary, I guess, of what came out of their report. And I guess the biggest issue from their perspective was waste and fraud and financial loss. And you could see the one at the bottom draws my attention, which is the government's failed to act on previous audit reports. And in that regard, I know that the Commonwealth Auditor General as well put out a document at the beginning of this, and I'd draw your attention to that. Rather than reinventing everything under the sun, I also look for what I can find and trawl from other sites. And I thought this wasn't a bad little newsletter that they put out way back in May 2020 about the issues that they'd found over a whole series of years about rapid implementation of Australian government initiatives. I mean, you can probably all still remember, because it's brought up fairly regularly, the pink bats affair with the government trying to get insulation into everyone's roof cavities, and the deaths that were associated with that rapidly and implemented, and some people say botched, program. So the Audit Office went back and looked through about the last 10 years of reports and said, well, what can we learn? And, what lessons do we need to take forward? And that, to me, that's kind of a clarion call out to all of us now. And I'll certainly be looking at that once this has all died down, because I want to go in and have a look at how business continuity arrangements stood up during the crisis. Predominantly from the point of view of answering the question, were they useful at all? Were we able to go and grab our BCP, our plan, and were we able to implement them, or did we start making stuff up from scratch? And that might be a good measure as to how effective those business continuity plans were. And during the Q&A, I'm quite happy to talk you through my own organisation's response and how we reacted to the crisis, and the fact that our entire workforce started working from home on the day that the state of emergency was declared. And I'm more than happy to kind of elaborate on what we did and how we were able to get to that in a fairly short order. But again, I just draw your attention to this document. When the time available, I'm not going to take you through it in depth, but it's up on the ANAO website. And because I'm speaking to FInPro, I thought I'd pull out one of the 9 principles that they espouse. And of course, this would be, this would be dear to your heart, that in any crisis, in any rapid implementation of any initiative, we need active budget oversight and strong financial management. And of course, you're the second line of defence, the finance professionals. The front line, the workers out there doing it and spending the money, and you're there behind them, making sure they're doing the right thing and spending money wisely and well. So they're kind of the headline things that I started worrying about. We've ramped up. We've had a big change in the way our organisations are run. Our staff, particularly our white collar staff, especially, have started working from home. We might have had to do some work around some rapid responses to certain situations and maybe ramp up expenditure. And given that context, we immediately as auditors, and no doubt you as finance professionals, would think about those 5 elements of internal control that I keep banging on about. I think every time I come and talk to you, I talk about the 5 elements of internal control using the COSO framework. So for those of you who are new to the industry or to that concept, I'd certainly commend it to you. It's worthwhile looking. That COSO framework's been now around for more than 20 years, so it's definitely stood the test of time. And the underpinning, the fundamental element of the framework is what they call the control environment. These are the things that support and shore up internal control in your organisation. And you can see the kind of the 5 elements of the control environment on the screen there. So again, it's not today to kind of lecture on what the control environment's about, but I'll go straight to where I think there could be red flags that would impact on your control environment that might diminish your control environment. And of course, you know, because the control environment's so much about people, it's about morale and motivation. And so how have you got to read on, and how do you understand the morale of your workforce, and has it been impacted? We certainly do a lot of outreach in our own organisation just to keep a reading on, you know, kind of everyone's attitude and from that their behaviours. The other thing that worries me in these times of crisis is sometimes you get the message coming down from the top, you know, that we can do, we must push through. And they're not bad messages, but sometimes they can be misinterpreted by staff, and you know, and they can be misinterpreted in a way that says it really doesn't matter what, you know, what we do. The end will justify the means, and we therefore can subvert process and work around process. And sometimes that needs to be done, but then you need some kind of processes behind that come in afterwards and say, well, now let's just check what we did and make sure that was the right thing. That particularly applies when you get to having to, you know, push a lot of dollars out the door very quickly. And we see this at the state government. And my advice to the agencies there is, yeah, but just come in behind it and do some tidying up after the event and check what you pushed out the door was the right stuff to the right people. So not bad having that message, but don't want that message misconstrued. I actually gave this presentation back in May, and maybe it was a bit prescient, but I really worry that when you set up crisis structures, you really get blurring of accountability and responsibility. And no doubt, as we've sat and watched the Board of Inquiry into the hotel quarantine disaster, there's been a lot of commentary about blurred accountability. In fact, it's pretty hard to find out who is accountable. And the other area that impacts on the control environment at times like this is either you get too much concentration or too much dilution of authority. You just don't, you might have to push decision-making rights down further into your organisation to get things done, or you might be pulling decision-making rights right up to the top in terms of a risk response. And when you get, if you haven't got that balance right, it kind of opens itself up, particularly to fraud and corruption. So that's the control environment. The workforce, of course, I'm not sure to what extent that was experienced in local government, but I know in the state government, they really had to rapidly increase the size of their workforce and redeploy staff into unfamiliar roles, particularly into finance roles. So they're not going to be as effective, basically, because they won't really have the background and understanding of what you need to do in those roles. Monitoring and review is another element of the control environment. Again, I won't go into the theory of it, but you can see that it encompasses your third line of defence plus your other own self-assessments and your own compliance programs. This is an area that could be affected in a crisis. So again, it's a question for you. Are there any red flags? Have we suddenly stopped doing internal audits? Have we suddenly stopped doing our control self-assessments because we're all busy doing something else? They would be a red flag. Sometimes programs, though, are set up based on a set of risk assumptions that existed, and now the risk assumptions have all changed. So am I happy if I've continued my program that the program is in fact aligned to the new risks that have emerged, or the changes in the risk ratings there? Are resources being diverted away from these important monitoring and review functions? And even has the independence of those functions been compromised? I know I've been speaking to a lot of state government agencies again about, well, can we use internal audit to go and have a look at the stuff we're doing to stand up this new system? And, you know, the short answer is yes, you can, but of course you don't want internal audit out there involved in processing transactions. Information and communication systems, I'll come back to those, I think. in greater depth when I get onto information security. But no doubt, again, speaking as an auditor, one of the things we have to be alert to is the pressure on people when they're producing financial information. And, if the revenues have been adversely impacted, depending on the incentives in the organisation and the remuneration structures and what's focused on, if there's a strong focus on revenue, or if there's a strong focus on maintaining an operating surplus, of course, that can create a risk that people might then start wanting to manipulate or interpret quite broadly accounting standards so that those adverse impacts don't reflect themselves in the financial statements. So I'm sure that's something that Sanchu would talk to you about at great length. And just the disruption to your information systems. Again, I'm not sure. I haven't got the detailed understanding of local government, but I know in the state government they had to stand up about 25,000 VPN connections within about 2 weeks to enable their staff to work externally. So they weren't able to necessarily continue to do their information processing for a couple of weeks. And then what worries me, of course, is we start getting record keeping lapses, that we stop keeping track of what the decisions that are being made. Again, we've got a case study with the quarantine inquiry. And, some people argue, well, it's too hard to keep records at the time. Well, in this remote and virtual environment we're in, a record can be as simple as we've seen and discussed at the Board of Inquiry, it can be a text, it can be an email. So I don't think it's too onerous to keep records. This is where the rubber hits the road for us as auditors, the actual controls that you wrap around your transaction processing and the recording and aggregation of those in your financial statements. Again, red flag for me is if you've had to, because of the crisis and the loss of staff or the diversion of staff to other priorities, if you haven't been able to maintain a good separation of incompatible duties between different finance functions, that would be a red flag. So, if someone's initiating a transaction and approving the transaction, probably not the ideal thing. Now, some small councils can't avoid that. They can't have segregation of duties, but they've quite often got some strong management oversight ex post, looking at transactions and balances, but with management attention diverted to other things. As you can imagine, that management oversight may dissipate. And of course, we start getting faced with very significant, very large and non-routine transactions. Now, most of our control systems are set up for routine transactions. So when we start getting novel transactions entering into the system, sometimes it's hard for people to discern how to treat those, even where to record them and how to classify them. Same with the very large transaction processing volumes combined with compressed processing timeframes. These will just bring in or increase the risk of error, basically, in processing. And the last one, and I think it was kind of one of the sense of what we're discussing here today, is how do we respond in a risk sense. Red flags for me comes back to that kind of can-do conversation I had at the beginning. There's a tendency to have your risk tolerances or your risk appetite informally relaxed. People, as I said, just want to get on and do the right thing. I think it's probably better for us to be very explicit about what our risk appetite is and understand explicitly whether we're going to relax our risk tolerances. And it's just a feature of this that, there's going to be new risks that have emerged that we haven't identified. And again, it's a bit like our internal audit programs. The risk treatments we've got to address existing risks may now be mismatched to those risks or to those new risks. So that's a very quick fly through, I know, but it's kind of those 5 elements of control that I love to come back to. And what I've just tried to communicate to you today is I think what I'd ask you as finance professionals in particular as the second line of defence is just use that as a bit of a checklist. Ask yourself if any of those red flags exist in your organisation, and then ask yourself, well, what could be the response to that? Which then leads me to the last thing I just wanted to quickly touch on, and I know IBAC has since put something out more recently here for the state government, but we are worried about the risk of corruption at all time and corrupt conduct, and fraud, of course, being one of those major kind of types of corruption. And some of you may be familiar with the fraud triangle, the fact that people rationalise their fraud, but is something for the individual, but really what we're focused on as auditors and what you're focused on as finance professionals is the opportunity and the motivation. And most importantly, I guess, the opportunity. So again, I draw your attention. It's a pretty good document. And ICAC, unsurprisingly, as we all kind of say, is that corruption and serious misconduct becomes more prevalent during these types of circumstances. You can understand the motivation with economic downturn, with people losing their jobs and worrying about where they're going to get their next meal from. Certainly, that would be a driver and a motivator. But when there's significant disruption as well, and when new things are being introduced, people will want to take advantage of that. They will seek the opportunity. So if the government's going to, or the council's going to have some new grants or some new programs, there'll be people out there seeing what they can get away with effectively. So the opportunities, where do the opportunities arise apart from those red flags in the 5 elements of control that I've spoken about? Well, I think the idea that staff are working remotely, it's very challenging, clearly. You don't have that direct connection, you don't have direct observation. And of course, you might not have all your staff there. So the absence of staff, particularly with when everyone had to have their kids at home and try and school them there. At the end of the day, IBAC's assessment was that these types of things precipitate workarounds. So they used the term workaround. It was a bit of a euphemism. Basically, I think the way they defined it is in novel or ingenious ways to get around the system and engage in corrupt conduct. So again, it's not that working from home is a bad thing, but there could be some red flags associated with it. So that's why I opened up and say we're really keen to make sure we're talking to our staff pretty much daily. We want to keep high contact with them. We want to keep them engaged. But what we do remind them uppermost is that they're sitting at home, and as I am, and that these are unsecure workspaces compared to your office workspace. And while you might trust your family and friends, so you've still got an obligation to keep your workspace secure. And even things like social media posts introduce a risk. I'll give you an example. On our team's site, we've got a little social club page, and people were posting some pictures of their desk at home, and you'd think, well, that's pretty, why not? I'll probably do that in Facebook. However, of course, there's things on the screen and things on the wall which are of an audit nature, which you wouldn't want them posting out there into the general public. So even something like that can create a risk and provide the opportunity for someone to then commit fraud against the council or from within the council. I'm always looking at procurement red flags in particular this time, because expenditure is an area that we've that has changed and will continue to change. And what I'm looking at, and no doubt you guys as finance areas would be starting to look at people who are trying to accelerate terms of trade, who are always trying to engage directly with suppliers, who are always asking you to can we just have another exemption here, please? There's an urgency about this, or can we start, kind of using the credit card, maxing out the credit card more often. So they would, those kind of combination of circumstances might give you pause for thought about it. I might just have to go and have a look at some of that procurement. And trust me, if you don't want to go and have a look at some of that procurement, my guys will. And we're certainly working up a few audits at the moment where we're looking at some, on the surface of it, some pretty dodgy procurement. Not in local government, I'll hasten to add at this stage, but you never know. This is mainly state. The last thing I just want to draw your attention to, and it's associated with corruption risk, it goes back to information and communication systems in the COSO framework, is the IT security red flags. So, rolling out VPNs quickly, you don't know, it's the endpoint devices are the things that worry me the most. So I'm using I've got my work computer here, I've got a home computer, we've got an iPad, we've got an iPhone. Those endpoint devices, if they're not managed by the organisation and with the organisation's policies over them, probably are less secure. Well, not probably, would definitely be less secure, and therefore there's a risk that your information can leak out of those. And we see, there's still people using single-factor authentication, and in a kind of a remote context, I cannot understand how you can only have single-factor authentication. The old idea of an ID, a login ID and a password is pretty much 10 years ago. And if we're not into multi-factor authentication or some kind of biological recognition system, then we're probably opening ourselves up more than we should to the risk of fraud. The super user one, I didn't mention. I'll just mention it quickly. There's a lesson learned here. I'm writing my report to Parliament on the state's financial report, and we have found a case where a super user, so what's a super user? It's someone in the IT system who has kind of super rights, has what we call privileged user access to your system. And the risk is they'll get in there and they'll start doing what they want behind the scenes, and they'll be able to cover up their activities. And that's exactly what's happened. And we're talking, large sums of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's uppermost in my mind. So I thought I'd better leave you with that one. We don't like to see very many people with privileged user access to your IT systems. Right, I've probably rambled on enough. Happy to take some questions, Bradley.
Yeah, thank you for that, Andrew. And probably people noting down they need to talk to IT and check who their super users are. So thank you for that and a bit of insight. A couple of questions coming through, and please feel free to throw them in the chat box or send me privately. One of the ones come through a couple of times is, I suppose, with that moving to more electronic documents and working from home, and obviously the security and the confidentiality of those documents. Are you seeing organisations, particularly in government, picking that risk up, and how are they best sort of dealing with those concerns?
Yeah. Look, I think, I'm not the IT expert here, but I'm happy to be proven wrong here, but establishing a really strong virtual private network, the VPN, and having these end user devices, these things that we've got on our desk, we call end user devices, having those managed and controlled by the organisation, by the IT. So I've got an iPhone. I don't control that iPhone. My IT area controls that iPhone. All the settings on it, they tell me, and I believe them, they don't have access to any of my private data on the iPhone, but they do control the security settings on it. And so that I can't upload, and I was having a bit of trouble here because I wanted to run Zoom on my work computer, but it's controlled by my IT. I can't just download an app and install it on my system. It's just not allowed, the system. So I think we've got to have that underpinning of that strong IT security in place. Now, when we get to sharing information between agencies, there's a couple of things. Maybe I don't want to steal too much of Sanchu's thunder, but we've had a situation with VAGO. We have a thing called KiteWorks, which is kind of like a Dropbox, where sensitive information can be shared, and there has to be a login and there has to be an email exchange. So I think you've got to be able to establish those ways to confidentially transmit information. And again, without stealing too much of Sanchu's thunder, I think I talked about better normal for us. I think we've proved that remote auditing is viable, albeit that we'd probably still want to come out and say hi to you, and the old-fashioned auditors still want to eyeball you. But I think what we'll be trying to do with you is work with you to get remote access into your systems. And that way we won't even have to worry about the transmission or sharing of data through other channels, because we'll be able to dial into your system directly and subject to the controls you've wrapped around the system. But, just to repeat, we have multi-factor authentication. We've had it for a couple of years now. So two-factor we started with, two-factor. So if you tried to log in, you also had you got a little message. You'd be familiar with this with your banking apps, for example, right? And now we're moving more to biological, to your face and whatever. So I think that's the key. The other thing is just, I was talking before we started to you, Bradley, and we're talking about some people just love paper and they like printing off paper. Well, the issue there is you have to make your home office as secure as your work office, and you've got to treat that information as though it's So if you want to be able to print off sensitive information, you have to have a cabinet you can store it in. It's those kind of basic hygiene things, I think, that we have to just keep reinforcing. But it's a hard thing to do.
No, it's certainly some changes afoot, and I think we've shown over the last little while we're adept at changing. Interested in your thoughts and whether VAGO's having a bit of a look or change of heart around some of the performance audits that were sort of earmarked for the next 12 to 18 months, and whether the impact of the COVID pandemic might shift your thinking in some of those?
Yeah, look, we're very close to, and I think last year I said we were about to start an audit of sexual harassment in local government. So just the first advert is we're very close to finalising that. And I'm really pleased with what the team's been able to do, because they've been able to generate dashboards for every council that participated in the survey. And if you haven't got those yet, they'll be certainly being sent out to you. So each council will get their own customised report about the respondents from their organisation, aggregated appropriately so that people can't be re-identified, of course. So that's close to wrapping up, as is the audit of road maintenance. And we had in our mind that we do one more kind of efficiency review, and I think it was going to be waste collection services, and that's still in the program. But we wanted to pivot to more regulatory reviews. You know, you look at food standards and whatever. So the program as it currently stands has not changed, but we are right now kind of re-evaluating the entire 3-year program. First and foremost, because we're not going to be able to deliver the 3-year program in 3 years. So the first kind of reality hit for us with COVID is it's probably going to take us 4 years to deliver the current 3-year program. So my guys will be, first thing they're doing right now is seeing which audits have to get pushed out into year 4. Well, we're in year 1 now, so, you know, the new year 4. And then as a part of that process, we'll be coming back and saying, are there any new topics? Look, nothing's jumped out at me from local government yet, but I mean, again, with Sanchu and my local government director, Shiraz Siddiqui, who's now thankfully back in Australia after spending the last 6 months stuck in Pakistan, would be very happy to hear about the types of performance audits we could do in local government that would help you, because that's what we're trying to do. Is at the end of the day, through the performance audit program, is see how we can improve services for Victorians. So I'm always keen to engage with, you know, FInPro, LG Pro, whoever, to get a sense of where should we be focusing our energy and attention. We always try to do 2 or 3 audits in local government every year. So, you know, the more input we can get from you about where you think that you get the biggest bang from the buck for us, then the more likely we are to shape and change the program accordingly.
Excellent. Great to hear. Thank you for that. I'm going to move across to Sanchu now, but I think, Andrew, you're going to hang around. So that people come up with something, add it to the chat. I'm sure that we'll have time for some questions and answer after Sanchu's presentation. But now a little bit of high level, let's delve right into a bit more of the technical and in the last little year-end process, Sanchu. So over to you.
Thank you, Bradley. Hopefully you can share my screen.
That's working from my angle. If you can start your presentation from there.
So you can see the screen?
I can see your screen.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Playing Old MacDonald at a farm in the background. If someone could mute that, that'd be fantastic. I'll hand over to you, Sanchu.
No, all good. Thanks, Bradley, and thanks, FInPro, for the opportunity as well. Quick introduction. Sanchu, Acting Director. I'm acting now for 9 months, out of which 3 months I'm at home specializing in remote auditing. So it has been really very challenging, interesting experience from my end, to say the least. But again, thanks to a very resourceful sector and good technology, I should say, has been a very smooth experience. In terms of agenda, sorry, I have a very short presentation. So I'll give an update on the 2020 audit process, discuss the key themes coming out of this year's audit program, touch on upcoming local government parliamentary report, discuss some of the challenges and opportunities for the 2021 audit cycle, a few admin matters to touch on, and then I have a slide on the performance audits in our sector. Now, this 2020 audit cycle, this is quick stats, quick update as at yesterday, actually. So good set of numbers for local government, given the circumstances in my mind. So at this stage, we are only waiting for 6 entities to come through for our clearance sign-offs. So the numbers are looking quite good. The chart below, so onto the right-hand side is the 2019, which in my mind is a normal year with 30th of September deadline. And the left side is the 2020 as at yesterday, the numbers. And I do want to point out to that two spikes in the 2019. So in a 3-week period, we pretty much sign off 77 out of last year was 108. So there is a significant amount of effort sort of concentrated in the 3-week period, I should say. So, and there is definitely scope to bring forward some of those clearance to earlier in August, take some pressure off us. Obviously, you can get on with the next year's operations as well. So thought I'll share that screen. The 2020 highlights, again, COVID-19 event, in my mind, for financial report, it's impacting the last quarter of the financial year. So the net financial impact to most of the councils, income statement, balance sheet, probably not considered material from an audit perspective number-wise, but the bigger impact was on the internal control framework, the IT control environment that Andrew touched on earlier. And some of those changes are going to be pretty permanent in nature. So again, that increases the audit risk in my mind. Performance statement space, again, more pronounced impact on COVID on few of those non-financial indicators. Again, adequately explained within the performance statement. So overall, I found the disclosures, the presentation relating to COVID adequate in the financial report and the performance statement, but quite varied within the sector. So with COVID expected to have a bigger impact in next year's financial reports and performance statement, I think a more consistent approach highlighting the impact will be the key, key consideration. Again, FInPro along with LGV, VAGO can be a part of that. New accounting standard implementation, sector seemed to have gone on top of the accounting and disclosures for the lease accounting standards early. For future years, it's probably quite important to sort of have some process in place to identify the new leases which are coming on or entered by councils which got some or new contracts with some leases embedded within that. And the classic example for the sector will be the waste contracts. So some are not currently on the balance sheet under the grandfathering provisions of AASB 16. And again, the waste contracts typically gets renewed 5 to 10 years. So just keeping in mind, that's something to look for. The revenue standards, and I felt the adoption of revenue standards probably not as smooth as leases. And again, potentially the complexity of revenue standards is a consideration, especially on accounting for the operating grants received closer to year end. So from an audit point of view, it's not a material revenue stream for a council. So less of a risk from that perspective. But I have a feeling that the sector can definitely benefit more from more guidance or training on accounting for these. Asset revaluation, again, COVID-19 did bring some challenges to, especially to the land asset revaluation as of 30th of June compared to an infrastructure or building revaluation, again, mainly driven by the uncertainty in the property market. Again, I found council management that was organized with the revaluation process early, quality reviewed, queried the valuers, including COVID-19 assumptions. They're in a much better position compared to auditors asking those questions for the first time. So again, pointer for next year, I guess. And again, I'm aware of a few of those councils who elected to sort of defer their formal revaluations from this year. So if you're one of those councils, do engage with your valuers early to sort of overcome these challenges for next year. Performance statement, again, with 5 years of data and comparability across sector, the performance statement as a reporting tool is definitely getting into that mature phase. So with target setting, pilot project by LGV to targets that is coming into play. So I can really see that stakeholder interest in the statement growing. Again, from an audit point of view, it sort of lifts the risk profile of that statement as well. Again, want to highlight that as part of performance statement audit process, we are picking up audit adjustment on indicator calculations, mainly in that non-financial indicators. So it'll be a continued audit focus from our end. And the last point is remote auditing. Again, seem to have gone relatively smoothly from our end, whether it's direct audits done by VAGO or through our audit service providers. New technology solutions definitely played a part. And internally, we are looking at fine-tuning our audit process to sort of take some learnings out of this experience for audits to come. The results of audit. So this is our parliamentary report. So parliamentary report is expected to be tabled by 31st of March. Structure is not expected to be very different. COVID impact on the sector, adoption of new accounting standards will be key changes for the content. Data dashboard will be refreshed. Again, I just want to point to the sector that the financial data of 79 councils for 5 years is available to be downloaded for any of your internal management benchmarking analysis. So it's available as a link with our data dashboard. And again, there is a questionnaire coming your way on the focus area. So it's delayed from my end, but I don't expect that to be a very onerous piece of work to complete at your end. Opportunities for 2021. Again, with no new accounting standards in play, should be a good year to consolidate and reflect in my mind. And I suspect COVID-19 impact will be listed as a key audit risk for next audit cycle. Quite a lot of government funding in response is expected to flow through to the sector. Again, as Andrew highlighted, there is quite a lot of, whether it is the Working for Victoria Fund, which I don't know, for a typical metro council, it's trying to employ 200 new employees. So it all comes with a set of risks. And councils in turn will be spending, whether it's small business grants, community grants to stimulate your municipality. There'll be accelerated capital spending. So all of these are highlighting those emerging risks and audit challenges which Andrew spoke about. And councils are also looking at the rate revenue, sorry. So the rates revenue relief through the refunds and the like. So refunds, whether it is rebates, and it's going to be, again, the presentation of that in the financial report is going to be varied, something to keep in mind. Economic downturn through COVID-19 impact potentially will have an impact on the asset values, property market as an example, or additional provisioning requirements. So this is defined benefit funds as an example. And the last point is the going concern assumption risk, again, for the council associated entities, whether it's subsidiaries, small leisure centers, all of that might need some additional financial support. On the on-site versus remote auditing, again, opportunity to find the right balance in my mind, whether it should be 1 day a week there, or whether it should be all remote. This is probably the year to find the right balance. And the last point is collaboration with both LGV and FInPro from our end. Few very quick admin matters. We'll be issuing the new engagement letters, again, to cover off, one, the new LG Act requirements, and also the council election means those charged with governance, there'll be some churn there. new VAGO templates, again, one to reflect LG Act changes, and the other point which Andrew made earlier, you might actually see the request for data on tab as coming through from the audit strategy document. The audit report will change for the local government Act changes. I can also confirm the third point there, that there is no changes to the VAGO direct or the outside outsource audit engagements for 2021. And again, the communication with the sector from financial audit end, it will continue, whether it is coming through to one of these forums or monthly updates and the like. And my performance audit colleagues indicated they're happy to come along to any audit committees or other meetings that's discussing a local government performance audit report. So do reach out if you want us to be part of any of that. And the last slide is just the performance statements, which are ongoing and upcoming at this stage. Thanks. So Bradley, that finishes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sanchu, for taking us through that. And can I echo a few comments that have come through to me, actually how fantastic the communication has been from VAGO and how willing you in particular, but your team's been to come along to FInPro or our regional groups or deal with sort of any issue along the way. It's been thoroughly pleasing from a FInPro perspective to deal with yourself. So thank you for that. I was interested, you obviously have seen in some way how 79 councils have handled the external and virtual audit. Just wondering, from those councils that did it probably a little bit better than some others, what were some of the things that you think those councils got organised themselves that made life easier?
I mean, a good example is how well our organization was. Again, this is just me thinking 3 years back, probably our organization wouldn't have been in that position. So it's the councils which, I don't know, had some system changeover in recent times where they've moved from legacy systems to a cloud-based system. So definitely had a better outcome than the other councils. So that's the first thing which comes to mind. And again, people and their ability to change and adapt comes into play as another factor as well.
Yeah, no problems. Another that sort of comes up from time to time is the local government performance reporting framework, and obviously you have your role through VAGO with the audit of the performance statements. Just wondering if there's sort of been any discussions with yourselves or LGV or anyone else about the type of indicators that are used around financial sustainability and whether they continue to be the right indicators and ones we should be using going forward?
Yep. So we catch up with LGV at least once in 6 months to sort of get a feel of where they're going with the performance statement changes. So last year, as an example, they did tweak a few of those indicators to line up to the VAGO ones. At this stage, I think they're on a 3 or 4 year cycle. So they don't make significant changes within that cycle. And I think the focus now, as I understand, is in the target setting space. So there is no big changes to the indicators coming.
Yeah. The next 8 months or 10 months is a really significant time with the implementation of the new Local Government Act and a few new financial documents. So compulsory to have a 10-year financial plan. The annual budget will move to a 4-year introduction of revenue and rating plan and also asset management plans. I don't know, it's probably forward thinking a little bit in the audit, not quite through the audit cycle, so maybe not turned your head to this so far, but do you see a role for VAGO as part of the audit of how they might provide some insights to the type of things that council should include in those documents?
Oh, so definitely, even through our Parliament report, we do sort of talk to the financial sustainability of the sector. So definitely.
I think, Bradley, that might be something that we could, I mean, I've got 2 thoughts in mind with this. The whole conversation around performance reporting, whether it's financial performance or service report performance, and the timeframes over which we budget and report. One response from our organisation could be to work up a bit of a performance audit, or now we've got the facility to do what we call limited assurance reviews, kind of negative assurance engagements, where we could kind of work with the sector and LGV and do a bit of a study and an analysis and what's been good about this, what's been bad about it, where does it need to improve. So I'm of a mind to do that, whether I do it as an audit or just do it as an engagement, as a project, basically within my organisation, because I've got a longer or a bigger agenda. So this plays out at the state government level as well. And we want to make sure that the effort we're putting into performance reporting pays us back in terms of getting useful information on which to make decisions, including budgetary decisions and whatever. So I'm certainly has my attention, and I certainly intend to do something in this space over the next 4 years. So that may be something that manifests itself in our annual plan.
No, that sounds fantastic, and I think all of us would be interested in something related to that. So there's no further questions. I'd really like to thank VAGO and Andrew and Sanchu for making themselves available today and to come along. Those slides and the recordings will be also available, so I encourage our members to review those slides. There's a few handy hints and things that we should be looking forward to. But and once again, thank you for the relationship. You're both always willing to come along and speak to FInPro, and we really do appreciate that. Obviously, a trying situation, and you guys got thrown in the deep end with virtual audits as much as we did. So thank you to you and your teams as well. So on behalf of FInPro, can I thank VAGO for the work so far. We look forward to continuing our ongoing relationship. So thanks, Andrew and Sanchu.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So that is the first part of our mini conference done and dusted. As you said, an insight to VAGO and what they've had over the last sort of few months and a look to the future. So we're going to give you an opportunity to stretch your legs for about 2 minutes. I'm sure you still want that in the virtual world. So opportunity to make a quick cup of tea or coffee, stretch your legs, and we'll be back here in 5 minutes. So we'll start bang on 2:30. I'll be handing over to our Vice President of Professional Development, Binda, from Wyndham City Council, and really looking forward to the next opportunity. I think the two speakers that we've got from one of the fastest growing councils in Wyndham City Council, and real country feel of Swan Hill. So we probably couldn't get two polar opposites to chat through the next period. So stay logged into here. Don't need to look for another Zoom session or anything like that. And we'll be bang on ready to go in a couple of minutes' time. Thanks, guys.